The evening sky hung low over the Blue Ridge Mountains, heavy with the scent of damp pine and the faint bite of autumn in the air. Sarah Mendoza gripped the steering wheel with one hand, her other resting loosely on her thigh, as her old Subaru hummed along the narrow two-lane road. Tommy sat in the back, his forehead pressed to the cool glass, tracing raindrops as they raced each other down the window. Luz hummed softly beside him, cradling her stuffed rabbit, a gift from their grandmother. The high pine bridge loomed ahead, its wooden planks and steel trusses stretching over the dark sweep of the river below. Sarah knew every inch of it. She'd crossed it hundreds of times on her commute between the small hospital where she worked and the cozy two-bedroom rental on the other side. It was old, sure, but it had always held. Still, tonight something felt different. The tires thudded onto the bridge, and a shiver traveled up her spine. The rain had turned to a mist, curling along the road, making the headlights cut through in pale cones. The boards beneath them groaned more than usual. "Mom?" Tommy's voice was tentative, his eyes shifting from the window to the side mirror. "Why's the bridge shaking?" Sarah forced a calm smile into her voice. "It's just old wood, honey." Bridges like this make noise. But then the groan deepened into a long, splitting crack. The car jolted. Sarah's stomach tightened as she eased her foot off the accelerator. A sound like thunder rolled beneath them, only it wasn't from the sky. The planks ahead seemed to ripple. "Mum!" Luz's small hands clutched the edge of her seat. Sarah slammed the brakes, heart pounding. The Subaru skidded to a stop halfway across. Another crack split the air, sharper this time, and she saw it, a section of the bridge ahead sagging toward the river. For one frozen moment, the world slowed. She thought of her father's hands holding hers in church when she was a girl. She thought of her husband, gone in an instant on a rain-slick highway years ago. And she thought of her children, their faces pale in the dim light. "Seat belts, now!" she shouted. But before she could move the car, the section beneath them buckled. The Subaru tilted forward, weight pulling them toward the darkness below. She grabbed for her children, one hand on Luz's shoulder, the other reaching back for Tommy. Her scream tore through the air, but it was drowned by the roar of collapsing wood and snapping steel. The fall never came. Sarah's eyes flew open, and the world around her glowed. Not the cold glow of headlights or lightning, but a warm, golden radiance that wrapped her in stillness. Her body hovered weightless above the river, her children frozen beside her, their hair and jackets stirring as if in a soft breeze. A figure stood before her in mid-air. White robes flowed as if in water, and a mantle of deep blue framed a face both young and ancient. Eyes that saw every sorrow and joy met hers, and Sarah felt a wave of peace she hadn't known since childhood. The woman's arms were outstretched, holding Sarah and her children aloft. No words passed her lips, yet Sarah heard them, a voice like a song she had forgotten. "You are not lost." A tear slid down Sarah's cheek, vanishing into the golden light. Then the warmth faded. The next instant she was lying on wet gravel by the riverbank, headlights glaring somewhere above, voices shouting. Tommy and Luz clung to her, trembling but unhurt. The roar of the river filled her ears and the world spun. Her last thought before the blackness took her was of those eyes and the impossible truth they carried. If you're captivated by what just happened, make sure you hit subscribe so you won't miss what comes next in Sarah's journey. The steady beep of a heart monitor pulled Sarah from the darkness. Her eyelids felt heavy as if weighed down by sand. She blinked, and the world came into focus. Pale hospital walls, the faint antiseptic smell, the muted shuffle of footsteps beyond a half-closed curtain. Her throat was dry, and when she tried to sit up, a dull ache rippled through her shoulders. A nurse appeared, her scrubs patterned with blue leaves. "You're awake," the nurse said softly, checking Sarah's vitals. "You've had quite the scare." Sarah's mind scrambled. "My kids, Tommy, Luz, they're fine, right across the hall." The nurse's expression softened. "Miraculously fine, actually, not a scratch." Miraculously. The word stuck. Within minutes, Tommy and Luz were by her bed, clinging to her arms. Tommy's face was pale, his eyes wide. "Mum, she caught us," he whispered. Sarah frowned. "Who?" The glowing lady, Luce said with the certainty only a child could have. She held us in the air. Sarah looked at them both, searching for something to say, but the memory, warm light, outstretched arms, flickered in her mind before she pushed it away. A knock sounded at the door. Sheriff Dave Whitmore stepped in, his uniform damp from rain. His weathered face wore the look of someone trying to make sense of what shouldn't make sense. "Sarah," he began, taking off his hat. "The bridge. Well, it's gone, completely. Folks say they saw you, floating." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you remember anything?" She hesitated. She knew the truth she'd seen, but it was too wild to speak aloud. "I just remember falling, and then I woke up here." He studied her a moment longer before nodding slowly. "We'll need to take your statement tomorrow. For now, rest." When he left, Sarah leaned back against the pillow. Outside, she could hear the distant rumble of voices. The local news had already latched onto the collapse. She imagined headlines splashed with words like miracle and mystery. Her mother arrived not long after, carrying a paper bag of empanadas. She sat close, her hands warm on Sarah's. "Mija, this was no accident. The Blessed Mother herself protected you. You have to see this for what it is." Sarah shook her head. "Mom, it was adrenaline, maybe luck." "Luck doesn't hold you in the air over a river," her mother interrupted, voice firm. God's hand was in this. The conviction in her mother's eyes unsettled her. She'd been raised to believe in the saints, in divine intervention, but after losing Mark, after praying and hearing only silence, faith had felt like a door locked from the other side. Luz tugged at her sleeve. "She smiled at you, Mom, like she knew you." Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms, hiding the tremor in her own. "It's okay, baby. We're safe now." Later that evening, she asked for a moment alone. The room grew still except for the hum of the fluorescent light. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to replay the moment, the weightlessness, the golden glow, the calm that had replaced her terror. It wasn't just a dream, but as quickly as the memory rose, doubt followed. Maybe her mind had filled in the blanks to protect her from the shock. Maybe Tommy and Luce had overheard someone talking about the Virgin Mary and imagined the rest. The beeping of the monitor seemed to echo her unease. Down the hall, she could hear her children laughing faintly with a nurse. That sound was proof enough of something extraordinary, whatever it was. She exhaled, long and slow. In the morning, the reporters would come. The sheriff would press again for answers, and she would have to decide whether to tell them the truth she had seen in the light or the safer version that kept her in the realm of reason. For now, she let the warm smell of empanadas linger in the room and tried unsuccessfully not to wonder if her mother might be right. Rain tapped steadily against the hospital window the next morning, a soft percussion that made Sarah feel like the world was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, and somewhere down the hall, a television murmured about the bridge collapse. Her mother had left early to let Sarah rest, but rest never came. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw that face, serene, illuminated, impossibly close. It was as though the memory lived in her skin, but she kept trying to push it away. Tommy peeked in from the doorway, still in the same hoodie he'd worn the night before. "Grandma says we can go home soon," he whispered, as if the idea itself might break. "That's what the nurse told me," Sarah said, forcing a small smile. "Why don't you and Luce get your things together?" Once they were gone, she picked up her phone and scrolled through unanswered messages. Most were from co-workers and old friends. "Is it true? We saw you on the news. Call me." She ignored them all and instead tapped the contact she'd been avoiding for years. The line rang twice before a warm, gravelly voice answered. "Sarah Mendoza. I didn't think I'd hear from you again." "Hi, Father Michael," she said, the old familiarity tugging at her chest. "I need to talk to you." An hour later, she sat in the small parish office, its walls lined with dusty books and a faded crucifix hanging above the desk. Father Michael looked older, his hair thinner, but his eyes still carried that quiet weight. "I heard about the bridge," he said, pouring her tea. "I also heard some unusual details." Sarah stared into the steam curling from the cup. My kids think the Virgin Mary saved us. And you? I don't know. The words came fast now, tumbling over each other. I saw something, felt something. But I haven't believed in years, Father. Not since Mark died. I prayed every day, begged for him to survive, and God stayed silent. Why would he answer now? He leaned back, folding his hands. Faith isn't a contract, Sarah. It doesn't work by bargaining. Sometimes grace arrives when we least expect it. She shook her head. Or maybe it's just trauma playing tricks on me. Maybe it was adrenaline shock. Maybe, he said gently, but maybe not. Your heart is wrestling with something bigger than explanations. Her chest tightened. She thought of her father taking her to Sunday Mass in the small Catholic church back in El Paso, of the smell of incense and the way the stained glass painted colors across her skin. She had believed then, fiercely, without hesitation. That girl felt like a stranger now. Father Michael slid a small worn rosary across the desk. Take it. No conditions. Just keep it near. And if you feel the pull to pray, even for a moment, follow it. She hesitated before tucking it into her pocket. The beads were smooth and cool, and the simple act felt heavier than she wanted to admit. Back at the hospital, her mother was waiting with the children. Luz ran to her, clutching a coloring page. I made this for you. It's the lady, see? She held it up, a stick-figure woman in a blue robe, a glowing yellow circle above her head. Sarah's heart skipped. It's beautiful, sweetie. On the drive home, the mountains rose around them, their peaks hidden in low clouds. Every bend in the road seemed sharper, every bridge a silent test. Tommy stared out at the river, his voice barely audible. Do you think she'll come back? Sarah tightened her grip on the wheel. I don't know, she said truthfully, but the question followed her all the way home, and long after the rain stopped it refused to leave. The morning after they returned home, Sarah found herself staring at the blinds, watching slivers of sunlight slide across the living room floor. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, the golden light, the calm face, the impossible stillness. She'd told herself to keep it quiet, but the world outside seemed determined to drag it out of her. A sharp knock rattled the front door. Through the peephole she saw a man in a crisp shirt holding a microphone, a camera operator at his side. Ms. Mendoza, the man called, his voice rehearsed and polite. We'd love to hear your account of what happened on High Pine Bridge. Sarah stepped back, pulse quickening. She didn't open the door. A second knock came, lighter this time. People are calling it a miracle, the reporter continued. Your neighbors say you were floating. She closed her eyes and waited until the footsteps faded. But the peace didn't last. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize, emails from online forums asking for interviews, even a voicemail from a morning show in New York. When Elena showed up that afternoon, she was carrying her old leather notebook, a pen tucked behind her ear. Before you say no, hear me out, she said, stepping into the kitchen. If you don't tell your version, someone else will tell it for you, and they'll get it wrong. Sarah poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, trying to gather her thoughts. Elena, I don't even know what my version is. Then start with what you do know, Elena urged. Your kids were there. You walked away without a scratch. The bridge is gone. That's already incredible. Sarah leaned against the counter. And then what? I tell the world a saint carried me in the air? You know how that'll sound. Eleanor gave her a look, one Sarah remembered from their teenage years, a mix of stubbornness and loyalty. You've never cared what people think. Why now? Because it's not just me, Sarah said sharply. It's Tommy and Luz. Kids can't handle being called liars at school. As if summoned by the words, Tommy shuffled into the room. Mrs. Lanning asked me today if we made it up, he mumbled. She said maybe I dreamed it. Sarah's heart sank. And what did you say? I told her I didn't dream it, he said, eyes fierce for a moment before looking down. Later that evening, Sheriff Whitmore arrived. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, his boots dusty. Mind if I come in? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. He sat stiffly on the couch. I've been hearing all kinds of stories about that night. Some folks think you're making it up. Others say you're the new patron saint of this county. Either way, the attention's not going to die down soon." "I didn't ask for any of it," Sarah said. "I know," he replied, leaning forward, "but it's here. My advice? Figure out what you want to say, or not say, and stick to it." The media smells uncertainty like blood. When he left, Sarah stood by the window watching him drive away. Across the street, she noticed two teenagers pointing their phones at her house. She pulled the blinds shut. That night, after the kids were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with the rosary Father Michael had given her. The beads were cool in her hand, grounding her in the middle of the noise. Outside, the crickets sang, oblivious to the headlines spinning just miles away. The world wanted an answer, but Sarah wasn't sure which truth she could live with. The wind carried the crisp bite of late autumn that evening, rattling the dried leaves against the siding of the house. Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the yard where the shadows of the oak trees stretched long in the moonlight. It had been a week since the collapse, and though the reporters had thinned out, the attention hadn't faded. Tommy sat at the table, with his homework spread out in front of him, erasing furiously. Luce lay on the rug, drawing with colored pencils, her tongue peeking out in concentration. Every few minutes she'd glance toward the back door, as if expecting someone to knock. "Why do you keep looking out there?" Sarah asked. Luce didn't look up. "She's watching," she said simply. "The lady in blue." Sarah's chest tightened. "Honey, you mean from that night?" "She comes to make sure we're safe." Luce shaded the edges of a yellow halo on her page. Tommy snorted without looking up. "That's just in your head." Sarah tried to laugh it off, but later, when the kids were in bed, she noticed something on the counter that stopped her cold. A rosary. Not the one from Father Michael, but another, older, with worn wooden beads and a tarnished silver crucifix. She knew this rosary. It had belonged to her father, lost years ago when he was buried. She picked it up slowly, running her fingers over the cross. The weight of it felt different, heavier with memory. "How?" she whispered, but the only answer was the hum of the refrigerator. The next day she found the first symbol. It was faint, carved into the wood of the porch railing, a simple fish, the Christian ichthys. At first she thought it was a child's doodle, but 2 days later another appeared on the frame of the front door, etched so precisely it looked as if it had been burned in. She mentioned it to Father Michael when she stopped by the church to drop off canned goods for the food drive. He listened carefully, then said, "Symbols like that have meaning, Sarah. They've been used for centuries as signs of protection. Maybe someone's trying to send you a message." "I don't want messages," she replied more sharply than she intended. "I want things to go back to normal." But normal was slipping further away. That night she was taking the trash out when she saw her, a figure just beyond the edge of the streetlight, standing still under the skeletal branches of the maple tree. The woman was small, her head covered with a faded shawl, and though her face was shadowed, Sarah felt the weight of her gaze. She froze. "Who are you?" The woman stepped forward just enough for the light to catch her eyes, dark, steady, ancient. Her voice was soft, but carried clearly in the still air. "You were saved for something greater." Sarah's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" But the woman, Maria del Cielo she would later learn, simply smiled, then turned and walked into the darkness between the houses. For a long time Sarah stood there, clutching the trash bag, the cold seeping into her bones. When she finally moved, she realized the bag had torn, spilling coffee grounds across the driveway. She left them there until morning. Inside, the house felt smaller, the air thicker. She checked on the kids, both asleep, their breathing steady. On Luce's nightstand lay the drawing of the lady in blue, the yellow halo brighter than anything else on the page. Sarah turned off the light and lingered in the doorway, the old rosary still in her pocket. Somewhere deep down, she knew the warnings had only begun. The first sign came in the middle of the night, a faint hum like a refrigerator running, but lower, deeper, vibrating through the walls. Sarah woke instantly, her skin prickling. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. She held her breath, listening. The hum swelled, then faded, replaced by the sudden click of the hallway light flicking on by itself. Her feet touched the cold floor before she realized she was moving. She stepped into the hall, heart thudding. The light switch was up, though she'd turned it off hours before. At the far end, Lucy's door was cracked open, a thin strip of gold from her nightlight spilling across the floor. Luce stirred as Sarah peeked in. "She was here," the girl murmured, without opening her eyes. "She said not to be afraid." Sarah's throat tightened. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." The next morning, the kitchen smelled faintly of smoke. She traced it to the toaster, though no one had used it. When she plugged it in, the lights above the sink flickered and buzzed. Later, while making coffee, the machine sputtered, groaned, and died, leaving the faint smell of burnt wiring. By noon, she called the landlord to check the electrical system. He came that afternoon, a lanky man named Joe who had managed the property for 20 years. After inspecting the outlets and breaker box, he shrugged. "Wiring's fine. Might just be bad luck." Bad luck didn't explain the shadows. That evening, as the kids played on the living room floor, Sarah caught movement in her peripheral vision. A shape sliding along the hallway wall. She turned sharply, but nothing was there. Twice more she saw it, a dark ripple that seemed to pull the light in around it. She found herself driving to the church the next morning. Father Michael listened quietly as she spoke, his hands folded on the desk. "It's not just the lights," she said. "It's other things. Smells, sounds. I think I'm seeing things move that aren't there." "Have you been sleeping?" "Not much," she admitted. "I keep wondering if I'm losing my mind." He shook his head. "What you're describing, sometimes when someone has a profound encounter, it stirs up other forces. Some will try to confuse you. Some will try to frighten you." "That's not comforting," she said, managing a humorless laugh. "I'm not here to comfort you," he replied gently. "I'm here to prepare you." He pulled a small bottle of holy water from a drawer. "Keep this in your home. Pray with it if you feel the air change." Sarah tucked it into her coat pocket. She didn't believe in haunted houses, or at least she hadn't yesterday. That night, Tommy woke screaming. She found him sitting up in bed, sweat-soaked, eyes darting to the window. "I saw the bridge breaking again," he gasped. "I felt it under my feet and then I fell and no one caught me this time." She pulled him close, rocking him. "It was just a dream. You're here. You're safe." He clung to her shirt. "I don't want to cross any bridges ever again." The words lodged in her heart. She smoothed his hair until his breathing slowed, but sleep didn't come easily for either of them. When she finally lay in her own bed, she thought about the hum, the shadows, Lucy's calm certainty, Tommy's fear. Maybe it was stress, trauma, a mind searching for patterns in the noise. Or maybe Father Michael was right. Maybe something had been stirred the night she hung in the air above the river, something that had no intention of letting her forget it. As the wind rattled the window panes, Sarah stared into the darkness, wondering which truth would be worse. By the second week of November, Sarah felt the walls closing in. The air in the house seemed heavier, like each breath carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. Every creak in the floor, every gust against the windows set her nerves on edge. It wasn't just the strange occurrences anymore. It was the way people looked at her. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when she walked past. Parents pulled their kids closer. She could almost hear the whispers trailing behind her like smoke. Work was no refuge. On Monday, in the middle of her shift at the hospital, she snapped at a co-worker who had asked, for the third time, if she was the miracle lady. Her voice came out sharp, the tone all wrong. An hour later, her supervisor called her into the office. "Sarah," Ms. Harper began carefully, "you've been a valued nurse here for years, but it's clear you need some time. I'm putting you on leave, paid, until you can get things sorted." The sting of humiliation was worse than the fear. She left without saying goodbye to anyone. At home, the tension was just as thick. Tommy had started avoiding her, spending hours in his room with the door shut. Luce clung to her constantly, but Sarah sensed even her daughter's cheerfulness was dimming. One evening, Elena called, her voice low. Look, Sarah, I've been trying to back you up, but people are starting to, well, wonder if you're okay. Some think you're making things up for attention. Others think you've lost it. I didn't ask for any of this, Sarah said, pacing the kitchen. I know, but maybe laying low for a while would help. Laying low won't make the shadows stop moving, Sarah replied before realizing how that sounded. Elena went quiet, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted. You're scaring me a little, Sarah. That night, she couldn't bring herself to turn off the lights. Every corner seemed to hold something watching, waiting. Sheriff Whitmore showed up the next afternoon. He leaned on the porch railing, his gaze sweeping the street. You mentioned that old woman before. Maria del Cielo? Sarah nodded. I've been digging, he said. No one by that name lives in the county. No ID records, no property, nothing. As far as I can tell, she doesn't exist. A chill ran through her. So what are you saying? She's a ghost? I'm saying be careful who you trust, he said, and maybe don't go looking for her. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, Sarah sat on the couch with the rosary in her hands. She tried to pray, but the words caught in her throat. She thought of her father's steady faith, her mother's unwavering belief, and how far she'd drifted from both. Tommy emerged from his room holding a crumpled math worksheet. I can't concentrate, he said, his voice shaking. Every time I look out the window, I think I see someone standing there. Sarah pulled him close, her own voice barely steady. There's no one there, Tommy, we're safe. But she didn't check the window. She didn't want to know if he was right. By midnight, the house was silent except for the faint rattle of wind through the eaves. Sarah lay awake, listening for the hum, the footsteps, the whispers she sometimes thought she heard just beneath the sound of her own breathing. She felt like the world had turned its back on her, friends, co-workers, even her own sense of reality. And in that silence, she began to wonder if this was the plan all along, to pull her apart piece by piece until she couldn't tell the difference between the truth and the fear. The wind off the river carried the smell of wet earth and rust as Sarah pulled her coat tighter around her. The remains of the High Pine Bridge jutted out from the water like broken bones, twisted beams catching the pale light of an overcast sky. She hadn't planned to come here, but something in her chest had insisted, a tug that grew stronger with every step along the muddy embankment. Bits of splintered wood and twisted metal littered the shore. She knelt to pick up a fragment of weathered plank, running her fingers over the grain. The sound of rushing water was steady, almost soothing, until her gaze caught on something half buried in the mud near the waterline. She reached down and brushed away the dirt. A small oval medal dulled with age lay in her palm. The image was clear despite the wear, Our Lady of Guadalupe, her hands folded in prayer, the rays of her halo etched delicately around her. Sarah froze. This wasn't just any medal. She knew it. Her father had given it to her when she was 12, after a summer trip to Mexico City. He'd bought it outside the basilica and told her to keep it close so you'll never feel alone. She'd worn it for years, until one day it vanished. She'd turned her whole apartment upside down looking for it, but it had been gone for over a decade. She whispered, "How are you here?" But the wind carried the words away. Kneeling in the damp grass, she closed her hand around the medal. The metal was icy against her skin, sending a shiver up her arm. For the first time since the collapse, she felt a strange steadiness, as if some piece of herself had been returned. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her from the moment. It was her mother. "Mija, where are you?" "By the river." A pause, then. "You went back to the bridge." "I found something." "Dad's medal." Her mother's voice softened, almost reverent. "Then it's a sign. He's telling you to trust what you saw." Sarah didn't answer. She slipped the medal into her coat pocket and stood, staring at the rushing water. That night she sat at the kitchen table with the medal in front of her. The overhead light cast a faint shadow of the tiny figure across the wood. Luz padded in quietly, holding her rabbit. "Is that hers?" Luz asked. Sarah blinked. "Whose?" "The lady's. She wanted you to have it back." Before Sarah could respond, Luce kissed her cheek and wandered back toward her room, leaving Sarah staring at the medal, her pulse quickening. The memory came unbidden, kneeling beside her father in the cool, dim basilica, the scent of candle wax thick in the air. She'd believed then deeply, without question. She whispered her prayers into the silence, sure someone was listening. She hadn't prayed in years. But now, her hands cupped around the medal, the words rose in her mind like they'd been waiting all along. She closed her eyes. "If there's something you want me to do, show me." For a moment, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the house settling. Then the air seemed to shift, warm and still. It passed quickly, leaving her unsure whether she'd imagined it. Still, the medal stayed warm in her palm long after she set it down. Upstairs, the wind rattled the window in her bedroom. She climbed the stairs slowly, carrying the medal with her. Whatever this was, coincidence, fate, something divine, it was no longer just in her past. It had followed her here, and it wasn't letting go. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the deep black sky, when Sarah felt the pull again, the same strange urging that had brought her to the bridge ruins. She bundled herself in her coat, the medal in her pocket, and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to bite, but still, even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. She walked toward the edge of town, where the streetlights thinned and the mountains rose like dark sentinels. Halfway down an old gravel road, she saw her, Maria del Cielo, standing at the bend, as if she had been waiting all along. The old woman's shawl moved gently in the night air, but her face was calm, lit by some glow that didn't come from the moon. "You've been avoiding me," Maria said, her voice carrying a strange certainty. "I don't know who you are," Sarah replied, her breath clouding in the cold. "Or what you want from me." Maria stepped closer. "You were chosen, not for your strength, though you have it, but because your heart still listens even when your mind doubts." Sarah frowned. "Chosen for what?" "To be a bridge." The words landed with a weight she couldn't explain. "A bridge?" Maria nodded slowly. "You were saved because there are others who will need saving, not just from water or falling beams, but from falling away entirely. You will hold them until they can stand again." Sarah shook her head. "I'm a nurse, not a whatever you think I am. I can't even keep my own life from falling apart." Maria's gaze softened. "That is why you were given the sign, the medal, the light, the vision. They are the beginning. There is more to come." Sarah felt her pulse in her throat. "More what?" Maria lifted her eyes toward the mountains. "The water will rise. It will come quickly, faster than the people believe possible. And when it comes, they will not be ready. A flood." Maria's voice was low, almost sorrowful. "It will take the bridge they are building now. You must warn them, or lives will be lost." Sarah stared at her. "Even if I did, no one would believe me." "They will not believe," Maria agreed. "Not until they see, but by then it will be too late. Your warning will save those who are willing to listen." The cold crept under Sarah's coat, but she didn't move. "Why me?" "Because you know what it feels like to be caught when you are certain you will fall. You will not turn away from those who are falling now." For a long moment they stood in silence. The air around Maria seemed to hum, as if it carried an unseen energy. Then she reached into her shawl and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She placed it in Sarah's hands. Inside was a candle, thick and plain, but etched with the same fish symbol Sarah had found carved into her porch railing. "When the signs begin, when the air grows still and the sky feels too heavy, light this and pray." Sarah closed her fingers around it. "And if I don't?" Maria's eyes met hers with a quiet intensity. "Then you will have chosen not to stand in the place you were given, but the river will still come." Before Sarah could reply, Maria turned and began walking down the road. Within moments, the darkness swallowed her. Sarah stood there for a long time, the candle in one pocket, the medal in the other, the words "you were chosen" echoing in her chest, until she wasn't sure if they were a warning or a burden. By morning, the certainty in Maria's voice still rang in Sarah's ears. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the candle she'd been given. The fish symbol etched into its side caught the weak light from the window. Outside, the sky was a dull sheet of grey, and the air felt colder than it should for early winter. She knew she had to say something, but to who? Telling the sheriff would get her a look like she'd grown 2 heads. Telling the town council would just feed the whispers already trailing her. Still, she couldn't shake the image of water swallowing the unfinished bridge, the panic in people's eyes. That afternoon, she drove to the construction site. The skeletal framework of the new bridge rose over the river, men in hard hats moving like ants across its length. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Curtis, spotted her from across the lot. "Are you here to gawk at the miracle, lady?" he called, smirking. "I'm here to tell you something," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "The river's going to flood, soon. That bridge won't hold." Curtis chuckled. "Ma'am, we've got engineers, weather monitors, the works. No flood's coming." "I'm telling you it is," she insisted. "If you don't prepare, people will die." His smile faded into irritation. "With respect, you should leave this to the professionals." She left with her hands trembling on the steering wheel, the dismissal burning more than she wanted to admit. 2 days later, she tried the mayor. His office was warm, smelling faintly of leather and coffee. He listened politely at first, but when she mentioned Maria and the vision, his expression tightened. "Sarah," he said, leaning forward, "people in this town are already concerned about you. I'd hate to see you give them more reason." When she got home, Tommy was at the kitchen counter, picking at his sandwich. "Mom, kids at school are saying you're crazy," he muttered without looking up. Her chest ached. "What do you think?" He hesitated. "I think you're different. Since the bridge." That night, she stood in the living room, staring at the candle on the mantel. She wanted to believe she could ignore it, that she could let whatever was coming pass without getting involved. But Maria's words wouldn't leave her. "You will have chosen not to stand in the place you were given." The next morning she went to Father Michael. He listened without interrupting, his eyes grave. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "I believe you," he said. The relief was almost enough to make her cry. "Then help me. Tell them." He nodded. "I will. But be ready. Faith is one thing, convincing others is another." That Sunday during Mass, Father Michael spoke from the pulpit about listening to warnings, about the dangers of ignoring the signs God might send through unlikely messengers. He didn't name Sarah, but she could feel the congregation's eyes drifting toward her pew. Afterward, as people filed out, some avoided her gaze, others gave her small nods. One woman squeezed her hand and whispered, "If you say it's coming, I believe you." It wasn't enough to sway the whole town, but it was something. That evening, the weather report mentioned a developing storm system hundreds of miles away, unlikely to impact the region. Still, the grey sky outside her window seemed heavier than before, and the air held a faint metallic scent, like rain waiting for its moment. Sarah stood at the window, the candle and medal in her pocket, knowing that even if the rest of the town thought she'd lost her mind, she wasn't going to stop warning them. Because if Maria was right, if the water was truly coming, staying silent was no longer an option. The first person to show up at Sarah's door was Mrs. Klein, the widow who lived 2 streets over. She held a grocery bag in one arm and a folded umbrella in the other. "I heard what Father Michael said on Sunday," she began, glancing around as if afraid the neighbors might see. "If there's even a chance you're right, we should be ready." Sarah invited her in, surprised. They talked over tea, and by the time Mrs. Klein left, she'd promised to speak to her bridge club, which in a town this size was less about cards and more about passing news faster than the local paper. By midweek, 3 more people had knocked, each with quiet questions. What signs should they watch for? Where could they go if the bridge failed? Sarah didn't have all the answers, but she told them what she knew. Be ready to leave, stay away from the river, and watch the sky. Elena called the next day. "I'm running the story," she said without preamble. "You'll get crucified for it," Sarah warned. "Maybe. But if I don't and something happens, I'll never forgive myself." When the article came out in the Blue Ridge Chronicle, it was cautious, focusing on potential storm risks, the unfinished bridge, and the town's need for a flood response plan. Still, the last paragraph quoted Sarah directly. I'd rather be wrong and prepared than silent and watch people die. The backlash was immediate. Online comments ranged from mocking to hostile. One post called her the bridge lunatic. Another suggested she should be checked into a psych ward. But in between the insults were messages from people offering sandbags, supplies, even spare rooms. Father Michael suggested a vigil. If they won't listen to warnings, maybe they'll listen to prayer, he said. On Friday evening, a small group gathered near the construction site, candles flickering in the cold wind. Sarah stood with Tommy and Luce beside her, the medal warm in her pocket. She spoke briefly, not about visions or prophecy, but about community and how quickly disaster can turn strangers into lifelines. When she finished, someone stepped out of the shadows at the far edge of the group. It was Maria del Cielo. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought she was imagining her. But then Elena gasped softly beside her, and Sarah realized she wasn't the only one who could see the old woman. Maria didn't speak, only nodded once before slipping back into the darkness. That small moment, others witnessing her presence, seemed to ripple through the crowd. The whispers afterward weren't skeptical. They were hushed, curious, almost reverent. By Saturday, the weather reports had shifted. The storm system was strengthening, moving faster than predicted. The news anchors spoke of possible flash flooding in low-lying areas, but no one mentioned the bridge directly. Sheriff Whitmore stopped by that evening, rain already spitting from a low, heavy sky. Town Council's meeting tomorrow to discuss an evacuation plan, he told her. Don't know if you spooked them or the weather did, but you got their attention. Sarah allowed herself a small exhale. It's not enough yet. It's a start, he replied, tugging his hat lower before stepping back into the rain. That night, Sarah lit the candle Maria had given her. The flame was steady despite the draft, its glow catching the fish symbol carved into the wax. She didn't know if it would change anything, but it made her feel less like she was standing alone. Outside, the wind rose, bending the trees in long, slow arcs. Somewhere beyond the hills, the storm was coming, and for the first time she thought maybe, just maybe, the town would be ready to face it. By Sunday afternoon, the mountains had vanished behind a wall of grey. The air was thick, pressing low against the rooftops, and the first heavy drops began to fall just as the town council adjourned their emergency meeting. Sarah stood on her porch, watching the rain blur the world. The sound was constant, a relentless hiss against the windows. Tommy and Luz were inside, packing small backpacks with the things she'd told them. Water bottles, flashlights, their favorite books. By nightfall, the storm was no longer a distant threat. Sheets of rain lashed the streets, and the wind howled around corners like it was trying to peel the houses apart. The river, which had been calm that morning, now surged with a muddy force that gnawed at its banks. Her phone buzzed, a text from Father Michael. Roads by the river are flooding. Don't wait if you need to move. She grabbed the bags and called for the kids. Shoes on, we're going to the high school gym. They stepped into the storm, water already ankle-deep in the yard. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting everything in a jittering yellow light. They weren't the only ones moving. Neighbors were wading through the rising water, shouting to each other over the roar of the wind. At the corner, Sheriff Whitmore was directing people toward the school. His uniform was soaked through, hat plastered to his head. "Road to the bridge is gone," he shouted. "Stay clear of the river." Sarah tightened her grip on Lucy's hand. The gym was still half a mile away, and the rain felt like needles against her face. They pushed forward, weaving between stalled cars and trash bins rolling in the current. Somewhere behind them a tree cracked and fell with a splintering crash, sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. Halfway there, Luce tugged at her arm. "Mum!" "Tommy?" Sarah turned. Tommy was gone. Her stomach dropped. She spun frantically, searching through the sheets of rain. Then she saw him, 20 yards back, struggling against the water as he tried to help a small terrier tangled in a fence. "Tommy!" she screamed, fighting her way toward him. The current was stronger here, tugging at her legs with a force that made her stumble. She reached him just as the dog broke free and bolted. The water surged again, higher this time, and before Sarah could react, Tommy's feet slipped. She lunged, catching his jacket, but the pull of the current dragged them both toward the side street, toward the river. "Hold on to me," she yelled, but the words were swallowed by the storm. They crashed against the guardrail, and Sarah's arms burned from the effort of keeping him above the water. Lucy's voice carried faintly from somewhere behind, high and terrified. Then, without warning, the guardrail gave way. The river opened below them, black and churning, swollen beyond its banks. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She tried to pull them back, but the current ripped harder, yanking them toward the drop. Somewhere deep inside she knew this was it. The bridge collapse had been a warning, and now the water had come for them again. She locked eyes with Tommy, trying to pour every ounce of courage she had into him. "I won't let go," she promised. But the current didn't care. It tore at them, dragging them into the river's rage. The cold was instant, shocking. Sarah fought to keep her head above water, the roar filling her ears until she couldn't hear anything else. Her last thought before the darkness surged around them was that she'd been here before, suspended between death and the impossible. Only this time, she didn't know if the miracle would come. The current spun Sarah and Tommy into the black churn of the river, water crashing over their heads, stealing the air from their lungs. She kicked hard, pulling him up, but the weight of the flood was relentless. The roar filled her ears until there was nothing else. No voices, no world beyond the rushing water. Her chest burned. The cold cut through her clothes like glass. She fought to keep Tommy's head above the surface, but each wave felt heavier, hungrier. "Mom!" His voice broke, swallowed almost instantly by the river. She refused to answer with anything but action, tightening her grip around his shoulders. But the current surged again, dragging them toward the twisted remains of the old bridge supports, jagged steel and splintered wood jutting from the water like spears. And then the pull vanished. It wasn't gradual. One moment the water was tearing them forward. The next they were suspended, the current passing beneath their feet like they were standing on invisible ground. Sarah gasped in the sudden stillness, her body trembling with shock. Around them the world was different, muffled, hushed, as though the river itself had bent to silence. A warm golden light enveloped them, brighter than the storm, wrapping around her like a living thing. She looked up. The Virgin Mary stood before her, robed in deep blue, her mantle rippling in a wind Sarah could not feel. Her face was the same as before, serene, ageless, eyes holding a depth Sarah could barely comprehend. "You will not be taken," the voice said, though the woman's lips did not move. Sarah's breath caught. "Why? Why me?" The answer came not in words, but in a wave of certainty. "Because you still hold others when you are falling yourself." A sob escaped her. "Please, my daughter—" The Virgin's gaze softened, and Sarah understood without explanation that Luce was safe. Then Mary turned her eyes toward the shore, where faint shapes moved in the rain. And just like that, the sound rushed back, the storm's howl, the river's rage. But Sarah and Tommy remained untouched. Slowly, gently, the invisible hands carried them toward the bank. They were set down on solid ground, the light dissolving into the grey of the storm. Sarah collapsed to her knees, coughing, holding Tommy against her. His eyes were wide, but he was breathing. A voice shouted over the rain. Sheriff Whitmore was running toward them, water up to his waist. "How in God's name?" He stopped short, his face slack with disbelief as his gaze flicked to the spot where the light had been. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't have to. The look in his eyes told her he'd seen something. Maybe not everything, but enough. Two neighbors splashed over to help them up the embankment. Tommy clung to her side, shivering but unhurt. Whitmore met her at the top. Rain streamed down his face, but his voice was steady. "Whatever just happened, I'm putting it in my report exactly as I saw it." Sarah searched his face for mockery and found none. Instead, there was a cautious respect, almost fear. The shelter's floodlights glowed faintly through the rain in the distance. They made their way there slowly, the wind tearing at their clothes, the river roaring behind them like a thing alive. Inside, the gym was packed with evacuees, wet, cold, wide-eyed. Luce ran to them the moment they stepped in, throwing herself into Sarah's arms. Sarah held her so tightly it hurt. In the far corner, for just a moment, Sarah thought she saw Maria del Cielo watching. But when she blinked, the woman was gone, and only the storm remained. By dawn, the storm had broken. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar, and a pale light seeped through the shelter's high windows. People spoke in hushed voices, the kind reserved for churches and hospital rooms. Sarah sat with Tommy and Luz wrapped in blankets, her hands still trembling from the night before. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, not the mocking curiosity she'd grown used to, but something different. Awe, maybe. Gratitude. Sheriff Whitmore approached, his uniform still damp, his expression unreadable. He crouched so his eyes met hers. "I put it in my report," he said. She swallowed. "What did you write?" "That I saw you and your boy lifted out of the river without anything holding you, and that there was light." His gaze didn't waver. "If people want to doubt me, they can. But I know what I saw." Something in her chest loosened at his words. "Thank you." From across the gym, Father Michael walked toward her, moving slowly between the cots and clusters of people. He knelt beside her chair, his lined face soft with wonder. "It wasn't your time, Sarah, and maybe now you understand why." Sarah glanced at her children, then back at him. "I think I do. At least, I want to." As the morning wore on, the evacuees trickled outside. The sky was washed clean, the mountains still streaked with fog. The river ran high and fast, carrying away branches and debris, but it was already retreating from the streets. Near the school entrance, Sarah saw something on the wet grass, a single white feather, perfectly dry despite the soaked ground. She bent to pick it up, the smooth shaft cool between her fingers. When she looked up, she thought she saw a figure at the far end of the street. Small, cloaked in blue, watching. She blinked and the figure was gone. Later that day, the town gathered at the church to give thanks. It wasn't an official service, just people showing up because they felt they needed to. Father Michael spoke briefly about survival, about the fragility of life, and about the mystery of grace. Sarah didn't speak, but when the service ended, strangers came to her, pressing her hands, murmuring blessings. A few asked quietly what she'd seen in the river. She didn't give details, only said, "We weren't alone." That evening she walked the quiet streets toward home. The power was still out, so the houses were dark, lit only by the pale blush of sunset. Her boots crunched over damp leaves. The medal was warm in her pocket, though the air was cool. When she reached her porch, she paused. The carved fish on the railing caught the fading light, its lines sharper than before, as though freshly made. She touched it and felt the faintest hum, like a heartbeat beneath the wood. Inside, she found the candle Maria had given her, its wick blackened from the night she'd lit it. She placed it in the center of the table and sat with her children. Luz leaned against her shoulder, half asleep, and Tommy traced the medal's outline through her coat. "You're different," he said quietly. Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." She thought about fear, how it had driven her, isolated her, worn her down. And she thought about the hands that had held her above the river, not once but twice. Whatever came next, she would not face it with the same fear. Outside, the last light faded, and the stars began to emerge over the Blue Ridge. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Winter settled quietly over the Blue Ridge, dusting the peaks in white and laying a thin frost across the rooftops. Life in town had returned to its rhythms, children trudging to school with red noses, shop windows dressed with wreaths, the faint scent of pine and wood smoke drifting through the air. For Sarah, the days no longer felt like something to endure. She was back at the hospital, her shifts filled with the steady pulse of care she'd always loved. But now she moved through each day with a stillness that surprised her. People still stopped her in the halls or at the grocery store to ask about the river, the light, the miracle. She answered gently, without the defensiveness that once tightened her voice. On weekends, she volunteered at the church, helping organize food drives and visiting shut-ins. Tommy often came along, carrying bags of canned goods up narrow porches, while Luz would chatter with the elderly women who adored her. Father Michael would sometimes catch Sarah's eye across the room, his smile carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had witnessed. Near the site of the old High Pine Bridge, a small shrine had been built, simple but tended with care. A wooden cross rose from a bed of stones, and beneath it, candles and flowers appeared and disappeared with the days. Sarah visited often, not out of obligation, but because the quiet there seemed to invite honesty. One grey afternoon, she stood by the cross, the medal warm in her palm, when Sheriff Whitmore arrived. He tipped his hat. "Town's different now," he said. "Folks watch the river more, keep their storm kits ready, not just because of the flood, but because they believe it can happen again." "They're right," Sarah replied. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the water slide beneath the temporary bridge. Eventually he nodded toward the medal. "Still carrying it?" "Always," she said. That evening, Sarah walked home with her children, the winter sun dipping low behind the mountains. Luce skipped ahead, her laughter rising into the cold air. Tommy walked beside Sarah, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" he asked. Sarah thought of the hands that had held them both above the flood, of the feather on the grass, of Maria's voice telling her she'd been chosen. She looked at him and smiled. She never really left. The path curved, and from the corner of her eye Sarah saw a figure standing on the ridge, small, cloaked in blue, watching. She didn't stop, didn't blink, didn't question it. The moment felt less like an apparition and more like a promise kept. At home, they lit the fireplace and made cocoa. Tommy settled with his book, Luce with her drawing pad. Sarah sat at the table, pulling the candle from the high shelf. Its carved fish symbol was still clear, the wick burned low but not gone. She didn't light it. Not tonight. Instead, she set it in the center of the table, a reminder that she was ready if it was ever needed again. Outside, snow began to fall in lazy spirals, frosting the street in white. The world was quiet, but not empty. Sarah knew her life would never be as it was before the bridge gave way. She had been carried, not just by a miracle, but by the strength of those who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. And now she carried others, in ways big and small. She glanced at her children, the firelight warming their faces, and felt a deep certainty settle in her chest. Whatever storms would come, whether from the sky, the river, or somewhere far beyond, they would meet them together. And that was enough. If you've followed Sarah's journey, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and don't forget to click the video now appearing on your screen to continue.